John Smith, Executive Director of Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, which is here in Boston, Roxbury, North Dorchester.
Hey, I'm Avery D. Ebron. I am the Director of Community Product at the Guild. We are a Black and Brown-owned cooperative based in Atlanta, Georgia. We build community-owned models of land, housing, and real estate. We also have a ground cover fund that funds community-owned projects, and we do ecosystem and capacity building programs to support that work. So excited to talk to you all today and dive deeper into our models.
So I was handed the mic. My name is Shauna Sabio. I'm co-founder of Grow House Community Design and Development Group. We're based out of Brooklyn, New York. We are in the process of doing something similar to what the Guild is doing, using community land trust in conjunction with other models to promote collective ownership and stewardship. And one of the things that's come up in our advisory council sessions is this idea of community. Right? How do you actually put the community in the community land trust? Because we take it as a given that everyone understands what that means. And so I'm curious, what did you do in order to ground everyone in a collective idea of what community is? And then also decision-making, because of, like we spoke about earlier, we're in a capitalist society which prioritizes individualism. How do you get people in the mind of making collective decisions who maybe have not had that experience before?
Yes, that's a great question, and I'm happy to be meeting you in person. I know we chat via email, and I know you think you met with Danny, and so I get to the first question and the second one. I think the word community, as you're naming, is thrown around a lot, and like, what does that really mean? And so for us, in the beginning, it was very important for us to sort of understand what that meant for us and like name what that meant for us. And so with the Community Stewardship Trust, for example, it's really focused on Southwest Atlanta and the 30310 zip code in that area. It's a predominantly Black zip code. And it's one of the few areas in Atlanta where Black neighborhoods still remain, albeit gentrification and displacement is rapidly taking place right now in that community. But we wanted to center the folks there, from there. And so when we name community, we really mean the folks who have built the fabric of that space, built what it means, built the culture of that community. And the CST will essentially only focus on that area. And the folks who will be a part of the CST need to be from that area, living in that area. Maybe they were from there, but maybe perhaps they were displaced, or they moved. We don't want to preclude that either. And just folks who have a meaningful connection to the area, having the opportunity to engage in the project and to engage in governance. And for us, community is also something that you do. And so what we try to do is always show that from the beginning of the project, moving forward, we want to make sure that we invite folks into the reasons of what we're doing and also show how we're doing it and give them a meaningful window into making a suggestion, having an idea, and also just unpacking that real estate process for them while doing that, such that they're taking ownership from the outset. We're getting permission from the outset. We're getting intentionality, not just from where we started, but the intentions of what they might have from the outset. And so we've had sessions where we've, for example, shown folks the layout of the project, like the proposed layout, the floor plans, and this is how the space will be used, and having conversations of what do you think of that? What do you think of the rent, right? Like, is this actually affordable? And doing what we can to implement that into the model to our best of our ability, and at the same time explaining why, hey, we can't do a ton of parking. Like parking, for example, is always a big issue and it can break projects. But there's street parking, but here's why we can only do this many parking spaces. In order to keep this project affordable, were we to do this, Oh, how you? Oh, hello. Sorry. Does this work? Yeah, sorry. So parking, I think, serves as a good example where a lot of folks in the community are concerned because you're taking a vacant building and you're adding it to the block, right? And that's going to bring even more traffic, perhaps in an area that has a ton of traffic. So folks want to know, well, how much parking are you building? But doing development, sometimes that comes at a price of affordability, of density. And so really just in a very accessible way, taking the time to unpack a concept like that and say, hey, we want to give as much parking as we can, but at the same time, this is the cost. This is the money that we're dealing with, right? This is the design. And so if we make a decision like that, this is how it's going to be impacted. On the other end, we have a 3-story building. We don't necessarily didn't have to include an elevator, but we want it to be accessible, right? And so, oh, well, we're going to take on additional costs to provide that elevator. And, this is how we're making sure that it can still remain affordable. So I think we just try to find ways to have that conversation with folks, working with local organizations who already have the trust in the context with folks to have that conversation with them. And I think inviting people into what you're doing in the most, I would say, bite-sized way that they can take it in and not overwhelm them, but at the same time, kind of slowly but surely unpack that work so they can really feel like, hey, you're being honest with me. You're really bringing me into this. You're really listening to what I'm saying. And you're really like unpacking some things that I didn't know about. And at the same time, this is what we're dealing with in the reality side of things, and it takes a while. And that's what we talked about earlier. That speed of trust versus that speed of capital is a difficult thing because once you get capital, they have timelines, and that work gets much more difficult. But I still think there's opportunities to engage folks in just designing those touch points in a meaningful way. Another thing I'll say is we do programming as well. So we do real estate training programming to like folks who don't know anything about real estate, but they want to learn how would I build an accessory dwelling unit in my backyard or something along those lines. We invite folks into things like that too to help build that understanding for folks, and that's another means of sort of slowly but surely inviting folks into something that can be very complicated, but it provides them with an incentive, especially if it's something that they're looking to engage in themselves. And overall, we're still in the process of forming our full governance model. But with the Community Stewardship Trust, we intend to allow the bylaws to shape, how that governance takes place. There is a push and pull with like the realities of financial and property management, right? And the realities of what a lender is going to, require of you to have in place for that property to be sustainable. And so getting that's a real thing. And so there's a push and pull with, hey, like, is this just a community of people making decisions on this space? Where do you sit with that decision making? How is that structured so that unfortunately our risk, questions are answered. But that's something that, we've taken a lot of time to structure, and it's really a matrix of decision making that you with community have to sort of have that conversation and ensure you're not designing something that precludes their governance and engagement, but at the same time something that can be sustainable. And I think I'm sorry if I'm going a little bit long, John. But yeah, we're on that journey right now ourselves as well.
Did he answer it? I think there's also a values discussion in community. So I'm thinking, okay, so for instance, DSNI, 40 years ago, here's this primarily Black African American community out in Roxbury that makes this decision to organize and go to the city and get this land through eminent domain. And they, that was a lot of advocacy work and organizing work, but they were primarily Black and African American people, right? Who would look at their community and was like, no, we're not going to do this anymore. It looks very different now. It's very different now. right, Sid? So now you have people. Sorry, I kind of talk soft, so you have to raise a little bit. Now you have people who are Asian, white, everybody. Primarily you have African from Cape Verde, right? Huge community there from Cape Verde. On all of them have, in some ways, very different cultural kind of values. So we're thinking now, how do you create community out of that? You live in Brooklyn, I'm sure you're aware of all that. So the sense of like, how do you create community with people that looks really different than how it started, right? And so you make it around, what do you all value? So if you're valuing that, you can own, that you're not going to be displaced, and that you get to make decisions for this community. You get to make that decision. I don't get to make that decision. You direct me in how you want us to do that, because that's our job. My job is to go to the city and to funders and to developers and right, and we talk about what we want for our community, but you have to inform that position. So for instance, just a couple of weeks ago, there's a trash transfer station on I think she lives in our community, so but I forget the name of the street. Yeah, so there's a trash transfer station. It smells horrible, and we found out that they actually bring trash from the suburbs into the community, right? And so it's not just serving our area, and so with one of the big construction companies, Suffolk, and we are organizing right now, this organizing effort, because it's the residents that says, this place smells horrible. There seem to be a lot more trucks here. What is happening? And so they came to us and said, we need to do something about this. So now we need to do something about this. So we need now to talk to them, talk to the city, talk to everybody about. So think about it. That has nothing to do with race, religion, class, anything. That's just what they value. They don't want their community to smell a certain way. They don't want everybody's trash to be processed in their backyard, where there are other places they could take their trash, right? So because, again, when we did the research, we found out, they're bringing trash from all over here, right? And then the community so they first said, we need to stop that. And now they're saying, we want to shut it down. We really want it shut down because it really doesn't need to be there. Longer fight, nascent battle that's just kind of happening. But we already had a hearing last week in the State House, had to testify and all that kind of stuff. So I'm saying that if we do things just so they're functional things like, what building are we going to put up? Parking, this, that. Sometimes people don't agree on that kind of stuff. We want more parking. We need parking. Oh, so it's enough street parking. Oh, but you get towed, right? You go into community meetings, you will hear everything, right? Like, who can park there? Who can't? Who do they want to? Some people want resident parking. No, people want, no, we don't want resident. You do that, then you're going to be in this endless cycle. Yeah. But you do like, what are we valuing is a different thing, right? What do we actually value as a community? So we value that we want to see stores and coffee shops and different things being developed. We don't want to leave where we live. We want our children to be able to walk to school. We want you guys to think about, what kind of businesses can we bring in that doesn't encroach upon where we live too much. And it's very hard to balance all of that, but at least we understand what people are valuing. So when people reach out and they say, John, I want to talk to you about this, I can easily say that's not going to happen. Or I can say, let's talk about it and see how it happens, right? Because I think the sense of community, when it's changed so much, and it fluctuates, who can afford to live there and who, you have to be able to do it more on what do people value.
So we're a baby. We're an organization. We're a member-based organization. We organize. What is it? It's called Sister Fire. We organize women of color and non-binary folks of color. We center Blackness in our work. And we've learned some things. We've run a pretty large campaign over the last 4 years, and it's winding down. And that was a Black maternal health campaign. We won a whole bunch of shit for our, doulas getting paid by insurance. We started a doula network. We got the Department of Health to put money directly into our communities. We've basically made the largest hospital in our state that do birthing, change a lot of their policies from how they hire to who they're hiring, yada, yada, a bunch of stuff. During the pandemic, we learned a whole bunch of shit around the economic impacts of our membership. And we're the only organization that exists as our type in Rhode Island. And we're based in Providence. We're a nonprofit, yes. We are, my operations director over there, she goes, you never get the membership right. So we probably have about an active 100 members, very active. Because of the work that we've done, we have a level of influence. But where we are right now, because we also do a lot of participatory action research, and the stories that we've been learning through economic impacts questions that we've been asking, there's a team of us here because we're starting to explore what next. All right, this campaign is shutting down, and what we've learned about what families need and women need, we're not going to get anyplace else. And so we've had us exploring a set of ideas around a trust, a fund. We've looked at also thinking about lending circles as a small point, because this low level of debt that people have. So we got the community part down. Like, we show up, we show out. We had a community baby shower on Saturday. It was one of the most amazing things the city's ever seen. It's our second time. But right now, the impact of, I don't want to run just do an any old policy campaign around housing, because they've been doing it and we haven't been winning there. There's people who are doing housing. So I'm like, how do we define some new solutions? I knew about DSNI because I went to college here, and I was like, I'm sorry, there's some people doing some shit that we're not doing in Rhode Island in a different kind of way. We have to go see it. But all that to say, during the pandemic, what we were able to do through a mutual aid fund is we raised over $100,000 and gave the money out on our terms. Everybody else had all these applications people had to fill out, and we were like, no, we trust our community. You tell us that's what you need the money for, here it goes. But I was like, what if we did that the other way around? We raised that, and now what are we purchasing? What are we doing? How are we going to do it differently so we have long-term stuff? But we're trying to figure out which one of these trust strategies, is it a fund, is it a trust? And you guys talked about different types, and how do you, 3 points that you could tell us when you're starting out? Here's the 3 things you need to think about. Or 2 places of people you need to talk to. We're in Rhode Island. John, we'll be at your door. Just be clear. Your door. That's right. I know DSNI. I know some of your staff. So we're just trying to figure it out. I brought a team here because for us, our members are here now because they have to be at the beginning of the conversation. They're the ones that said we have to do it, so I'm here.
So I would say that the first thing is clarity.
Yeah.
Like, if you're going to do something, you have to be clear about if you're going to do something, sorry with the mics, you have to be clear about what you want to do. So, all right. So for instance, we're sitting in this strategy meeting, we're thinking about DSNI. Great. We have all this housing, we have this, we have this land, we have this. Then we read that, so if you're in Boston and you're reading, there's a huge thing now about when the climate impacts, whatever's going to happen hits, Black and brown communities are going to suffer the most, right? Because we're already living in places that is hotter than everywhere else. We're already, right? We don't have the kind of infrastructure in that sort of make climate mitigation, we're going to suffer, right? Mostly there's these communities. The housing is old, so people are talking about the green new economy and retrofit. People in the community don't have no sense of that, right? But then when you talk to them, and if it's all over the news and in the globe, they're like, wait, what's going to happen? And are we going to flood? Is it going to be too hot? Like, when it's too hot, what do you do? What does that mean? Like, how do we prepare for that? So we decided to gain some clarity on, like, what is the thing that we can do? We have this whole community. And so now we're going to work with that community to build out what we are calling, and what's in sort of the parlance of the day, resilience hubs. What does that mean? It means that so it's more than a microgrid, right? If the city floods, which it's prone to do, given our location, if there are heat impacts, if there are other kinds of disaster-related events, that at least we have backup systems. There's like water filtration systems, heat, like it gets cold here. So the heating systems, all kinds of things that you can now build that people are actually working on in present time to mitigate against some of this stuff. It's all over the place, right? So there are companies working on it, there are people working on it, there's all kinds of things that people are doing to basically say, if everything's shut down, your community in a certain can keep running. And then you have we have to identify a building in the community that they could like retrofit, that people can actually go to. So if you think about an event like Katrina, I lived in New Orleans when Katrina happened. I lost where I lived when Katrina happened. When people lost their homes and when people had to move, they went to the Superdome. And then they went to the convention center, and then nobody knew what to do, and then people died, right? Unless you could leave the city, it was sketchy, right? So what do you do if something like that happens in Boston? Do we go to where the Celtics are, or Fenway Park, or, right? How are we getting ourselves ready for those kinds of disasters? So that's what we're thinking about now. But our clarity is around, we understand that this is what the community wants. They may not understand everything about climate change. Here's what they're really clear on. If something happens, I want to be ready, and I want to know that my home is ready, and I want to know that we've retrofitted it, and I want to know. So we could talk about all the heat, water, and all the different things. People know, and funny enough, they care about Wi-Fi. Will I have Wi-Fi? Those kinds of things. And yes, you can, if you put the systems in place. So it does become a question of like community, as Sister asked, but also what is the community value? And now they're like, yeah, we value, like, we don't want our homes to be flooded out. We want to be able to come back into that neighborhood. And what can we do to preserve that neighborhood where we live and work? So I think it's just a question of clarity. Once you're clear, then please knock on the door and we can work together and figure something out. Or fly to Atlanta. It's a nicer place. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would echo a lot of that sentiment. First, I just want to say thank you for your beautiful work. And I think, and this goes back to the question about community, you have that already. And that's really the most difficult and critical work there, because those folks are going to be building the foundation of what it is and setting the culture, right? And shaping what we're talking about, the clarity of what is actually needed. What are those highest priorities? And how do we go about getting there in a way that's in alignment with our values? What are our no's? What are we going to say no to? Absolutely, no matter what, right? And because you have that community, because you've raised capital already, you have a lot of the pieces in place. So I just want to firstly say thank you for your work, and I think you're in a really great place. And then I just want to echo that I do think the central question is, what is the imperative there for your community? I would be very community focused there too, because as you have in the past, and continue in that. With the guild, I would say, I think it's okay for that clarity to happen in an emergent way. And I'll just talk about like two of the models the guild's working. And so with the Community Stewardship Trust, for example, when the guild started out back in 2015, this is before I was there, In Nikishka, they were focused on Black and brown small businesses, doing capacity building for them, back office, helping them to identify spaces to operate, right? And alongside of that was us also like finding those spaces and inviting them in to operate and creating that community there. But we weren't the owners or holders of the space. And so we were at the mercy of landlords. And it began to emerge, not with just us, but the other small businesses and the folks in their communities that they were serving, that no matter what we do, no matter what, grant we might get for our small business, we still need a place to operate, right? I don't want to get a 1-year lease, get everything up, and then the next year it's out, it's up, And so that emerged as, hey, we need to acquire and foster and steward space. Like, otherwise, it's not a safe long-term solution and proposition. And so that led us into not only wanting to foster that for the small business community, but also residential space, because in a holistic sense, they're hand in hand. And so that led us to, hey, we want to foster the type of space that we're already fostering, but we just don't own it. And we went on that journey of learning about community ownership models and things of that nature. And at the same time, we identified a community that was already trying to come together and purchase a space at 918 Deal Avenue. Had been vacant for some time, but they were unable to do it, the market forces or whatnot. And so we saw an opportunity to step in and say, hey, in these situations, we can step in and provide that development support, right? And then let the community continue its work with trying to steward this space. And so that's how we are where we are now. We met a need that we also had, but also we saw from the community, and we kind of emerged into what that looks like and what those needs are. Another example I would say is our work with the People's Community Land Trust in another neighborhood in Atlanta, where the Housing Justice League it's a great organization in Atlanta. They're housing organizers. They've been doing great work, housing policy, just pushing things publicly. But as we all know, the policy work can be slow sometimes, and you don't necessarily get what you need. And also, like you said, there's always a great desire to, advocate and push. But how can we acquire something that's a solution long term? And so we, in engaging with them and supporting their work, saw an opportunity to step in on the development side of things and say, hey, how about we support what you're doing and bring some permanence to it via a land trust? We didn't walk out the street saying we want to do a land trust. We engaged with the folks in that community who were already pushing for that, and we tried to make sure that we can implement it in a sustainable way. And so that solution, again, came from the need that was apparent, and also the people already focused on doing that work. What could help them get to the next level of what they're doing, and how can we meet them there? And just that clarity enabled us to develop a pretty neat solution for that. So I would say clarity is definitely important when you're starting out, but there's a journey there, and you're on that journey. And I would say it would help to understand or have some clarity around, maybe the mutual aid was great. Learn from your community, like what the priority would be, that prioritized next step. I think that would help a little bit with implementing a solution. But I don't want to just say, I just want to say though, it is an emergent process. And I think you're on that process and you're going in the right direction. And I think we both are, happy to support that.
Who are the people in here from Boston? So for the Boston people, understand this. When folks are thinking about the emergent process he's talking about in terms of clarity, I always think about the universities. The universities come to communities and they always want to study. We want to study why it's so great. We want to study why it's so, and then they want to tell you what you should do. So they like to tell communities what they should do because they're all bright, right? They're all PhDs in Harvard and all these different places. And we get that a lot. Do you know how many people want to come and study DSNI and then want to tell people what we should do. We had a visiting group from England. They all came from Oxford, and then they like, first of all, you don't even live here. Great, thank you for coming. But they want to create like this, what you should do, like give the community a plan. And if you do that, it has never worked. I have not seen a plan yet that people go, we've studied this, we've went all over the world, here's what everybody's doing, here's what you should do, kind of thing. So the emergent thing is really about, right, like the idea that you work with that community, and that's where it will emerge from. Like if you really center the community, not just give them something, like we're gonna do this, it doesn't work. Like, it doesn't work well, because then there's immediate sort of backlash. But we see it all the time here. Trust me. It's like every single university and every single academic institution, everybody comes and they bring their classes and they study DSNI and do this and do that and walk them to the neighborhood and they want to see and do you want to talk to any of the neighbors? No. We just want to see what's going on. Yeah.
It's true.
You? I'm happy. It's all community.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Nadav. I'm at the Center for Economic Democracy. And Avery, I really appreciated you were just talking about the connections to other organizations in the local ecosystem. So I'm curious about just to hear more from both of you about like why you think it's important to connect the work you're doing to local struggles, whether it's like, around housing, but also in other areas. I'm just thinking about the No Cop City movement in Atlanta and all the great organizing in Boston. What's possible when you connect like the land trust or other parts of your project to the broader political struggle?
To the broader political struggle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's always important to, like when we're talking about the work that we're doing, to understand that it can't or won't happen in a silo. So we got, and essentially the reason why we do that is because we want our work to be elevating what is already in place. We don't want to helicopter in or mess up or not leverage a lot of the resources that have already been vested in these different issues, right? But rather find our place in that ecosystem and understand how we can help the ecosystem itself be more generative and healthy and powerful and see that power. I think it's not necessarily about one project. We understand that. But we take a ecosystem or if you're on the street thinking about the entire block, maybe there's a convenience store, maybe there's a nonprofit, maybe there's a church, maybe there's a clinic right there. Your impact will be much better. And this isn't always possible, but if you can align your work with their work, because you're not going to have enough resources. That's the kind of the practical, feasible side of things. There just aren't enough resources to do these things. And B, if you would just work together, you can amplify the impact of what you're doing. And it can be a more broad impact that's going to support more groups of folks. And so we always take the concept of just understanding what folks are already doing and our alignment with that and understanding how this is pushing the ecosystem. And essentially, when we think about actually doing the work, we think about what the work ultimately will support the ecosystem to be able to do. And if you take that ecosystem perspective, and that can be down to a block, that can be a neighborhood, that can be a zip code or an entire city or whatnot. But if you take that perspective, you'll be able to sort of, and this maybe goes to the previous question too, and I forgot to mention that piece, but contextualize your work within that ecosystem to where you can accomplish and serve your community, but also it's serving and benefiting other communities around that fabric and framework. I don't think working in silos is a good idea. There are numbers of examples where folks try to do that, and it creates a competitive, destructive, sometimes even amongst nonprofits. We're all trying to get grants and philanthropy and funding, and it just creates what we're trying to fight against. And that's the other side of it too, is being aware of how what you're doing is impacting others. We are lucky enough sometimes to access capital that a lot of folks in our communities just simply can't access, right? And so for us, that means, okay, we can access this capital. They love what we're doing. They're doing something similar or that complements it. Let's let them work with us on this single project. Let's invite those eyes into the work that they're doing as well. And even if outside of us, they decide to go do more work, now their network, now their presence has grown. And so that builds trust, because if those organizations are people from that community, they truly do represent the needs of the community. That matters when people see you moving in solidarity together versus coming in and, you know, moving alone and essentially competing with other folks in your ecosystem. I think I don't want to say that you absolutely should not do it, but I would say it's definitely better to try to take that ecosystem perspective and benefit the greater whole and understand how you sit there. It's not an easy thing to understand, and it does take a lot of work. But we found that when we do that, we learn a lot more about the solution that we thought we had, and we are able to contextualize it into something that actually suits the people in the neighborhood even better. And so it informs our work essentially. And as long as you have space to do that, which is, we can get into a funding conversation later, but that's critical. Oh, let's go. Sorry.
I'm going that
I
side
saw a lot
first
of
because they asked
hands.
me. But the ecosystem battle is real, and I'll just say this for Boston, so because it's the context I know best. We have a nonprofit industrial complex in Boston. It's a very real thing, and everybody's competing.
Yeah.
Everybody's competing. There are 1,000,001 youth serving organizations, environmental justice organizations. We have three of the biggest funders, two of whom were in a room today. Representatives were in a room today. And everybody goes to them and competes against each other, right? And everybody because people want to keep their job, they want to keep, there's a pragmatic reality to like, I need to pay my staff, I need to get funded, I need to do my job. I think we're rooted in community, they're not. It happens all the time. People go in rooms and people go into rooms and talk and create partnerships. Yeah, we're partnering with DSNI. And I've never heard of them. And it happens, and then people will tell you, oh, they said they were. Like, all that happens, right? So there's a reality around like who gets money, who gets this, who doesn't get that, where they want to direct their funds, and that can change every single year. Like what's important to them changes, right? So for me and for us, I just frame it as this is all relational. It's all relational, right? And so if we work directly with a community that we serve, we make sure that on that community, whether it's youth serving work or any other, we have relationships with them. We make sure that we have relationships with workforce development people because we understand that people in that community want to work and they want to understand that, right? We have relationships with the education folks because we understand there's after school care, there's all kinds of things that people are interested in. So for us, the partnerships are very pragmatic and real. And it doesn't have to do with DSNI getting money to do this or DSNI getting money, but we want to, again, center community and support what they want. So folks want to have places to send their folks after school. Folks want to have, right? They want to get workforce training. They want to, so who are we reaching out to? How are we helping them? How are we contextualizing, making the needs of that community real right? They want folks want to learn construction. They want to learn some of this new and emerging work in terms of solar and all that kind of stuff. So that's where we base our partnerships on. Because if you just go out and start, we want money for this, we want money for that, that landscape is crazy. And I know that in this city, people do all kinds of things to get money to run their organizations, which is real and practical and right, Sid, and there's so much that people do, but we have to make sure that we center it in what people want and what we think, not what we think, but what the community thinks is best for them.
And sorry, I just want to add one last thing to that. Sorry, really quickly. I would also just, the last point, the resources are so thin, you're probably not going to accomplish what you want if you don't. And so that's just also just the real reality. You might get that grant for now, but you do have to share it and share the work. You need a cooperative framework of organizations that make any of this possible. So I just wanted to put that in the note. Sorry.
Thank you. I just had a really quick question. I wanted to talk to you, Avery, especially with us being from the South. I'm from Africatown in Mobile, Alabama. And you answered the question about community, which was very helpful because this community has a big issue with talking about who's not community and who's outsiders. So the definition of community is very important. But what I really want to know is how you learned what you all know, the practical application of this concept, because as I said before, this collective ownership is what Africatown was founded on. My ancestors were on the Clotilda, and 32 of those Africans put their money together to buy property from their enslavers. So this community was built on that, but it's something that has gotten lost over the years. So I feel like it's incumbent upon me to bring this teaching back and to teach everybody else so we can go on this journey together. But how did you learn it to begin with, the practical application of this concept?
All of it.
And I know we're short on time, so I'll be quick, which I'm not good at. That's a really good question. I think the main two ways I would say is from folks who are already doing the work. For me, coming into the guild and learning from the folks that are already in the guild, but also folks across the nation who are already sort of doing work in solidarity economy in some sense, and really taking the time to understand their models and like the why behind them and what's really happening there. Not just on a high level what it is, but how did they get there? What were their key lessons learned? So that's a lot of like personal relations, talking with folks. There's also a lot of history that you named that we're just really standing on the shoulders of. For us, folks have been doing this collective work for a long time, and there's been intentional things put in place to disrupt it. For example, in Albany, not too far from Alabama, New Communities is an example of that, where you have the first CLT in the nation, and they came together to do that work to support that community. And although it might not have worked out due to extractive financial systems, that doesn't mean that the work wasn't great and that it wasn't a good model and it wasn't something that we need. Just got to learn the lessons of the weapons, the way that finance is weaponized against it. And so really just studying the history, engaging with the folks that are already doing the work, and then just taking time to actually listen and learn while doing, and taking time to unpack like, hey, this is what we want to do. That probably won't work, and here's why. That doesn't work financially, even though it's on mission. Or this is how you can do it financially, but this is why it will preclude your principles in the end. So I think there's a practical learning on the job sort of situation that you have to go through as well, specific to your model, that you can't assimilate elsewhere. So those are sort of the ways that we got to it. And I would just say, I try to always be an open book, because a lot of people come to us and say, hey, how do you do that? Can we want to do this over here and all of this? So I always try to, even though time is constrained, create space to unpack like those learnings, those fundamentals, the journey, right? Because that's what I had to do to wrap my brain around it.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cassandra Webb. I am from Louisville, Kentucky. For the past 4.5 years, I've been working on a project called Russell Place of Promise that's focused on community wealth building in a historic neighborhood of Louisville called Russell. And I appreciate what you all have shared so far and been looking at the Guild and looking at DSNI for the past few years as models. And hopefully at the end of this month, able to take some residents to Atlanta and spend maybe some time with the Guild. I'll reach out. But I have two questions. One is about healing in this work, because a lot of the folks that are leading the work or communities that we're working with are experiencing trauma, especially when it comes to the safety of housing and the instability of housing. And how does that show up in the work that you all do? And how are you all putting in healing practices, restorative practices when you're working with community around housing and community wealth building? And then my second question is in regards to sustainability. So oftentimes when it comes to this work, it could be funded for a period of time, like in Louisville, Kentucky, around the Breonna Taylor murder that happened. We saw a huge flux of local funders that wanted to invest in Black-led organizations. But now 3 years later, that's not interesting anymore. It's not cute. It's not sexy. And so folks are not willing to be as supportive to our work in particular and other Black-led organizations. And so I would like to hear about, like, how do we make sure this work is sustainable from not only the funding perspective, but also leadership perspective, right? Because we also see that folks will hold positions for 15, 20 plus years and not have a succession plan. And then the work that they've been doing dies away with them. So if you all can talk about those things.
You first.
There's a funder here who we just started having that discussion about succession planning. Probably most of us are working for really small organizations, right? And sometimes it's the idea of the person that founded it, and then you create this organization, like you're talking, like, and so that does not come up at all because they don't have the resources to do it, right? So we're talking to this foundation about what is it that we need to do to train like board and staff and leaders. So a lot of this is training, right? People have this great idea, they find this organization, they create this organization, it starts up, they get funding, they start moving, they hire some people, and things are great. And then they start doing the work. But then you quickly burn out.
Yep.
That's like thing one. You quickly burn out because this work is hard. And then there are things we need to acknowledge. The work that probably all of us do in the sector that we do in it is really hard because it takes a long time to change, to create change, right? And so you have people who are invested in this work, and then some people are invested and then they don't know how to train somebody else to do this work. So we have to work. So you don't only go to funders for money just to do that. You go to funders, you have to be the person thinking about it. If you're the person in your organization, either leading it or in some leadership position, you have to be that person who says, we need to train on this. So there's training that needs to happen. There's actually ways to run organizations that we sometimes forget, right? And that we should work on and that be intentional about. And we have to be intentional about changing, because I don't want to be here for 15, 20 years. Who wants that, right? Who you want actually people who are younger and engaged and who have energy and who's able to work on that and form those relationships to be in that space. But you can't do that training on your own. You have to be able to get people to come in, people bring in people who can help them, right? And that's something that that's why I said part of the work is relational. So like I can literally go to some foundations and say, here's what we need. We need to train some people. The other thing that's emerging, lastly, and then I want the Guild to talk about it, but the corporate world does sabbaticals. Right? Everybody's like, And so I told a funder recently that if you really care about organizations, pay for the executive directors to have sabbaticals. You agree with that, right? Pay for the executive directors to have sabbaticals because you're going to burn them out. And then you can't think, you can't do anything, they get tired, they get, right? So if you're thinking about them, like, pay for them to get sabbaticals. It seems very like, and then the friend that said, yeah, they do that all the time at the universities and at the thing. Why can't we do that for the folks that we're trying to take care of, whose work we think is important? So that's something we're discussing right now. I'll introduce you to that funder.
Thank you. So I'll be quick because I know we're almost out of time. Firstly, I'm glad you raised healing as a central focus. Although that's not something that often folks want to fund around or think about, you can't really do any of the work that we're trying to do if you don't understand, like, hey, there's healing that needs to take place for me to engage with anything, myself included, right? There's things that I experienced growing up with housing and eviction, and just you don't realize it when you're going through it, but it does create an interesting dynamic when you're trying to engage with another model, something that may seem different or unique or risky. And so I think the way that we try to show up is whenever we have community meetings or events, we try to offer activities where there's joy and unpacking and, hey, what would you like to see? Um, we're not on our team, we're not like healers ourselves, but we try to not approach it from a standpoint where they're used to engaging housing and get them off of that, out of that mindset and in the mindset of, hey, I'm here for you, we're here for you. We see you firstly in the work that we're doing. And then I would also say we try to engage organizations that do that work and as much as possible construct our model in our space such that they can do their work in our space and be sustainable. Because again, we're not that. We have to partner for that. But I will say it is something that I'm glad you raised it because it's essential and it's going to be hard. Like just for us folks investing in a property, right? But you're coming from a context of so much disenfranchisement and extraction and snake oil, and folks trying to take advantage of you. Like you really have to move in trust and move with intentionality, and also invite folks in and give them a soft way to get in, right? So like for example, this is something like not big, but we try to do raffles. If you come to the event, go get a massage after. Something like that. It's not a big thing, but it's just a way for us to show like, hey, this is hard. It's hard for us, it's hard for you. And that's how we're moving. And lastly, I think with the sustainability question, it's hard. That's hard because most organizations, they structure themselves to have space for that, right? We get just enough to do the project. Sometimes we can't even do the project. We don't get the capital we need while the project is being built. Like if you're getting a developer fee, for example, where you need all this time to build trust, how am I gonna eat? How's my family gonna eat during that process? And so sustainability is a big issue. I think we don't need to reinvent the wheel on organizational practices that help build your organizational infrastructure and training and development and things of that nature. A lot of times we can't afford to hire someone to focus on that. But one thing that we're trying to do, and we're working on this right now, is just building, and we're cooperative, but building our cooperative practices, building our standard operating procedures, building things that will allow us to be structured in a sense such that we're not burned out as much. And also how we're inviting more folks into our work so that when the day comes, we can be replaced, and they're not dropped into something that requires so much context. So we're always trying to build a strong community of, hey, these folks have context of what we're doing. They've been walking with us throughout this process. They understand it a little bit. So they're kind of closer in proximity to being able to join and take on the work when the time comes for that. And so we always try to foster that and invite, volunteer and internship opportunities as much as we can as well to just keep that going and just find creative ways with scarce resources to not, put us in a situation where one person leaves is over. Because that is a real threat to a lot of the work that we do. I think I'm over time, but I didn't mean to end on a bad note. And I see another question. But.
Oh, okay. Thank you all so much. The last practical thing. Ask your foundations for unrestricted funding and then invest it. That's a real thing. Yes, you can do that. Ask your foundations. You don't want program related funding. You don't. I'm saying it out loud. Go to the foundations. You want unrestricted funding, and then get a really good partner and invest it. That helps with sustainability.
Yep.